option available on Zoom, and the chat option will be made available at a later stage, and we will of course mention that as well. We have also received some questions for our panelists today. And may I please request all members of the audience to kindly keep their devices on mute and keep their videos turned off for the duration of the session. Thank you. Yes, and it looks like we're live on YouTube as well. So a very warm welcome to our panelists and the members of our audience. First and foremost, I hope you're all keeping well and safe in socially distant spaces wherever in the world you are. And thank you very much for joining us today from across multiple time zones. I am Neha Dewan, Fellow and Political Affairs Officer at GPI, and it is my great honor to welcome you all to our expert panel discussion on peering into the future, economy, society, and global politics after COVID-19. Now, COVID-19 has indirectly and directly affected billions of lives across the globe. It has claimed almost 4 million lives, directly infected 6.5 million individuals around the world. The long-term consequences and ramifications of disruptions of the economic order, societal relationships, and the political space can be far worse, however. And this calls for an exigent discussion on what is the revised role of the state and what does the social contract between the state and its subject now look like. So let's begin this inquiry into what our shared futures as billions of individuals across the world looks like as we emerge out of this shared crisis. So to answer some fundamental questions about our future and whether it is likely to bear any semblance with how it was construed up until 2020, we bring into conversation today leading and prominent political thinkers. We have the leading futurist, Professor Sohail Inayatullah, the inaugural UNESCO Chair in Future Study, Professor at Tamkem University, Taipei, Associate at Mount Eliza Executive Education, Melbourne Business School, and Adjunct Professor at the University of Sunshine Coast. He is the Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Future Studies and serves on the editorial board of numerous reputable publications. He has himself authored over 350 scholarly works and almost 30 books, including Asia 2038, 10 Disruptions That Change Everything, which I'm sure will be of great relevance to today's discussion as well. Joining him in conversation is a leading expert on international security, Jan Kalvik, the editor-in-chief of Defense and Intelligence Norway, an author, journalist, editor, and PR expert. Jan has experienced the inside world of shifting geopolitics for almost 4 decades and has commentated as a specialist on not only strategic security affairs, but also on a range of perspectives within the broader discipline of international relations and politics. So before we begin this long anticipated panel, let me invite Arpit Chaturvedi to deliver opening remarks. Arpit is the CEO and co-founder of GPI, Global Policy Insights. He is also the co-founder at NVPol, an environmental and public policy consultancy, an instructor and the academic coordinator at the Indian School of Public Policy. Arpit is also a lecturer at the San Francisco State University. He is also the author of the critically acclaimed book, Our Egalitarian Universe, and the former editor-in-chief at the Cornell Policy Review. Over to you, Arpit.
Thank you, Neha, for the kind introduction. So just to be clear, I'm not speaking on the panel. I'm just the CEO, so I get a seat at the table. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about Global Policy Insights. And before doing that, on behalf of Global Policy Insights and our associate organization, NVPol, I'd like to say that we stand in support of the Black Lives Matter movement, and we condemn the atrocities across the world based on caste, color, racial discrimination, religion. We absolutely abhor that and condemn that. Now, having said that, I'm going to introduce what GPI is all about. We started GPI in 2019 with a view of coming up with strategies for developing countries when the big powers are, so to say, in competition. And at GPI, our aim has always been to give strategic advice to various stakeholders in developing countries in partnership with developed nations. And what we soon realized that, no matter how, how much strategic insight we generate, it's also going to be important to strengthen the governance structures of a number of developing countries such as India, Costa Rica, Bangladesh, and other countries that we focus on. That's why if you look at the kind of things that we do, our focus areas, number one is international political economy and strategic studies. That's where we talk about strategy. Another focus area that we have is governance, because we think that in order to be able to implement strategies, you've got to have strong governance systems. And that's why we produce a lot of material on that. You'll be able to access it on our website, www.globalpolicyinsights.com. And eventually what we realize is that, hey, what are we all doing this for? We are doing this for sustainability, for human sustainability, so that people are able to live together and progress in cooperation in the long term. So that's why a third vertical becomes human sustainability. And recently we have also added a vertical on artificial intelligence, and we have launched an AI and public policy lab as well. Now that's about GPI. I want to thank Jan and Sohail for joining us, and really looking forward to the discussion. I think we're in a time where we are seeing unprecedented challenges, from the COVID crisis to other, issues which are emerging, such as the murder of George Floyd, and a lot of protests going on, racial violence, and countries coming in conflict with each other. And it looks like that the whole world is on fire. And we'd like to learn from you what the future holds for us, and how should we approach the political economy, our environment, and our lives in the future. So thank you so much, Sohail and Jan, for joining us. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Arpit, and thank you for our solidarity statement as well. So let's commence our discussion as we untie the Gordian knot of the future of economy, society, and world politics after COVID-19. As for the format of the panel that I will be moderating today, I will be posing one common question each to the panelists for their opening remarks, which will be followed by subsequent questions in an open house discussion format. And then we have a special feature for today's webinar, which is a fast-paced Q&A session. And following that, we move into audience questions and concluding remarks. So let's dive straight in then with Jan and Sohail, our panelists, our experts for the day. Now, there is a lot of speculation about the infinite ways in which this pestilence can alter, the state of the world affairs. But let me ask Sohail first. Will there be a remarkable shift in global priorities in the post-COVID world order, if any at all? And while the pandemic presents a prescient warning, favoring alternatives across the board, from security alliances, climate action, futuristic cities, and more, how tangible are we with an era of change, given the splintering political divides that we can see on the world stage today? So if we can have Sohail followed by Jan, please.
I guess the way I try to look at it is less what will happen and more what are the scenarios. So future studies work is very clear. Here's the problem. Here are the emerging issues, disruptions coming at us. Here are the scenarios, and here's the narratives we need to use or not use. That's my framework to even think about this. So the piece I did recently, we looked at 4 futures of COVID-19. And the first one was really around the zombie apocalypse. And that comes from the US CDC. That was their headline many years ago. It was very clear. We've been following this for about 18 years now. Every meeting we've had with animal health experts, every meeting concluded with the pandemic's coming, be ready. So it was never really a black swan. It was something we knew was coming, but some of the implications have been quite surprising. So in the zombie apocalypse scenario, really we're seeing some of the early indicators: fracturing of nations, major divisions throughout the world. So the contradiction in the world system, the racialization of the world system, inequity in the world system, nations being held together without any real purposeful imagination of who they are, those are getting heightened. So that's scenario one. Scenario two is really, this is the big pause. If you're in a decent middle class or upper class, it's your chance to rest. You do very little this year. You're stuck wherever you're stuck, and you take it easy. Next year, you go back to business as usual. So this is to slow down, to speed up. So this is no real shift per se, but it's a year of rest. Take it easy. Don't worry about anything. Scenario three for us becomes much more interesting. It's to slow down that leads to transformation. So meaning, if we look, is COVID-19 a war, as some leaders have said, or as Roy, the Indian novelist, has said, the South Asian novelist, actually COVID-19 is a portal to a different world. So if we explore this portal metaphor, that's our scenario three. That's the Great Awakening. So what does that awakening look like? So we're seeing that with the Black Lives Movement, a chance to rethink who we are. We're seeing that with New Zealand, very focused, compassion, direct action, early action. Taiwan is doing well because they've developed the foresight learned from the past. So some of the problems in scenario one, the zombie apocalypse, get slowly resolved in scenario three. So this is the idealistic one. You know, Alibaba in 2003, they weren't an online company then. SARS started, they went online. So from a business view, it's saying, okay, here's a crisis. How then do I leverage this crisis and do things differently? I'm working with some schools, and we did a workshop in January, and it was very clear, go online, more flexibility, more partners, give the students a chance to learn anywhere, anytime, anywhere. That was a crazy scenario in January. Now I revisited with them a few weeks ago, and they said, we're already halfway there. So suddenly what was impossible 6 months ago is now just possible, but we're well on our way. So scenario three is AI resolving those contradictions. Now, scenario four is quite different. That's the great despair. There's no vaccine. There's no cure. This is a 7-year recession, depression. Markets are high now because everyone's intoxicated. Once they figure out the full extent of what's going to happen, then basically we enter 7 tough, very tough years. There'll be economic collapses in countries, and you know what that leads to in terms of minorities, vulnerability, in terms of refugees. So that's a very tough scenario. So I can't tell you what's going to happen, but clearly from all the data analysis we've done, the textual analysis, there's 4 possible futures here. And each one, what happens to nation states, to economies, to inequity, changes quite dramatically. We know already in the scenario 1, violence against females goes up dramatically, and we're seeing it everywhere. We know depression, suicide go up dramatically, we're already seeing that. So the implications are quite different based on which future you can see, and there's no way anyone has enough data or ability to say this will happen. If they do, they're in total delusion.
Right. Thank you, Sohail. And I understand that, you know, with future studies, especially with your work, a lot of focus is on the underlying narratives and what they tell us of the future. But let me bring in Jan here as well. Jan, you know, where do you think global priorities for the future lie, and what, in your perception, are the narratives that would define them?
I can see that. First, thanks to Sohail for a good explanation of the possibilities for the future. That is very well done work. From my side, right now, I cannot see how this will end, or if we have enough information right now to predict where this will end, if it will end. I can see that there are far more consequences and serious long-term consequences now than I could predict myself in the beginning of the pandemic. I thought this would be something that would blow over before New Year this year, but I can see now that there are far-reaching consequences, not only negative, but positive. Like you say, school kids are learning at home via internet. I have a 13-year-old son in Norway while I'm stuck in Thailand because of COVID. And 1 week after the schools were closed, they were online with their teacher and are doing their full studies from home, full school day. When it comes to how business are acting, I talk to people who see this as a global restart. Now, would you like me to elaborate on these things?
Let me bring in a question there, Jan, that of course, with these scenarios that we're seeing, there is an accompanying debate which is brought to the fore, which is about effective leadership, strategic governance, because we are at a point where, even though you do have a pessimistic sort of view for the months coming forward, we are moving past lockdowns. We're looking at economic structuring. So at this juncture, let me ask you, who do you think will be the game-changing stakeholders in the world politics? In particular, with Europe, will it be an altruistic Europe that will be the front runner of this post-pandemic ideological order? Or do you see Europe crumbling under the weight of its, rising autocrats, surprisingly? And what do you think of the stakeholders going forward?
Well, beyond the immediate effects of the pandemic, like these horrible human sufferings and economic slowdown, there is clear sign that something has happened in the relations between I would still call them superpowers, like China, Russia, and United States. But I can see how they talk together, how they communicate has changed. And this bumper sticker politics has become the new normal. People are not always telling the truth when they communicate. I see a tendency to both bending and sacrificing the truth because the politicians, they want to put their own country first, like America first. And it is disturbing that how the Chinese government is openly blackmailing World Health Organization. But on the other hand, it is also disturbing that President Trump is stopping the money flow to any organization that is not following his orders or his opinion. Different nations of the world rethink how to secure the people and take care of national interest. And that is good. We can see how many governments think globally and act locally. During this challenging time, international organizations like United Nations and of course UNESCO play an important role. But also military operations with NATO, that is securing peace and stability. The situation can easily get out of control because even though it seems like the first wave is starting to, borders are open. You can fly to London if you want to. You can fly to Paris probably. Germany will open in 1 week for tourists from 30 countries to travel in. But I don't think the full impact has hit us yet, and there will be a second wave and likely more waves. When it will be a vaccine, that will be a changing thing in all relations, both between people and between nations. But the question is, when will it come and will people take it? I read a survey today that 9 out of 10 people actually are positive. 1 month ago, it was like 50-50 in United States, but that is shifting because people can see how the suffering is going on. And yeah, it's a horrible situation, and we have nothing in the history to compare with because this is a man-made situation. This is nothing that comes from nature. And made in China has got a new meaning, to be honest. But discussions like this is good, and transparency is good. but it would be naive to believe that all states will be open with everything they do. We are in the hands of state leaders that for any price will work for themselves, for their people. United States are a splendid example here with the president who says America first at any opportunity. And it is normally good to do the best for your people of your own country, but it's possible to have two thoughts in the brain at the same time. In order to secure world peace and cooperation, it is necessary to both show respect and to be generous. I think we all can improve how we treat our fellow humans. And during this difficult time, we can actually see how people help each other and work together to manage. We see how the use of modern technology in communication has taken a quantum leap. People work from home, companies hire and fire online. You do not have to go to office anymore to get things done, and you don't have to visit your GP in person to get medical advice. When it comes to security, we have seen how easy it is to rock the balance. I've heard more than a handful of top leaders in security, governments and politics, business, military, and how they all describe this as a global restart. This is an opportunity for nations striving to make their best for their citizens. Like United States, they want more than to participate in the race. They want a medal. Despite economic turmoil, there is a growing optimism in countries that until now has been in the shadow of, for example, European nations. This restart means that everyone has a fair chance. Everyone has a fair chance to grow on the world market. And it actually does not matter for most that China and United States are quarreling like two 4-year-old boys in kindergarten about their trade deals. While they spend time and energy on this, they might be bypassed by others who are more flexible and see the opportunities. Looking at Europe, there are remarkable contrasts between nations that we normally mention in the same sentence. And we got our first dictator in a long time. And guess what? Hungary is a member of the European Union. And when a prime minister is using COVID-19 as an excuse to turn a democracy into dictatorship, we know where this is heading. Hungary's prime minister, Viktor Orbán, gave himself all power. He introduced an indefinite and uncontrolled state of emergency. He suspended the national parliament for an unlimited time and gave the government the power to rule single-handed by decree. And when a member of the European Union picks up the heritage from Spain's Franco and Italy's Mussolini, it's time to get worried. The problem here is that the European Union itself has lost the backbone and probably sold the soul in the ambitions to enroll any country that was willing to join the club after the collapse of the Soviet Union. We have seen other examples like Poland, who simply don't follow the rules and put their own interest first. Poland first. They probably chant. And when the union cannot maintain a decent discipline in and among the member states, I doubt they will manage to put enough pressure on Hungary to force them back to democracy and Western values. Well, dictators come and go. Let's look at the times to come. The future might, despite of all this, be brighter than ever. COVID-19 has brought many people closer together. The global restart might more than compensate for the economic loss. So let us be optimistic. The dramatic situation has proved that the humans are adaptable, tough, and can get through tough times. I have to quote an old friend of me, retired army captain, pilot, and member of the United Nations War Crime Investigation Group in former Yugoslavia, 88-year-old Arne Gerrit Halvorsen. He's sending his best regards from northern Norway right now, where he's watching us. He would like to underline the following. We who remember the Second World War, we know that during troubled times, stick your hands in the pocket and count to 10. So just keep calm and carry on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and that was really helpful and very insightful in really contextualizing the geopolitical questions and debates that we have about our future. And if I can bring in Sohail there, particularly to comment on these rising nationalistic and inwards looking tendencies, but also to speak about the role that international organizations can play in this context, whether like they have been historically, can this also be a turning point for them to be reinvigorating as catalysts of change in the global order, or will they become instruments of power play?
I mean, this is the tension we're all facing, right? So to your earlier tension about nation states, the disruptions for me is first around gender.
Mhm.
So one is within the zombie scenario, the despair scenario, in terms of the vulnerable being worse off. The opposite, of course, if we see which world leaders have been decisive, have been clear, have been visionary, have been female leaders, from the president of Taiwan to the prime minister of New Zealand onwards. So there's a gender dimension here. The second part in terms of disruption, if you look at supply chains, I think the lesson will be use 3D printing or additive manufacturing. So you can localize, keep the supply chain quite limited, and ensure profits stay local. So those are among two of the big issues. The third part here is, in terms of international organizations, this is just, I think, as Jan was saying, this is phase one, right? This is pandemic 1.0. Unless you see, SARS, Ebola, et cetera. But forgetting that for a second, what's the next pandemic? Because the core causes in terms of consumption of meat, in terms of industrial farming, in terms of wet markets, those haven't been resolved. So zoonosis is likely to happen again. So then the issue becomes, are international organizations able and willing to use foresight for these global challenges? I think in this case, Jan's question was, well, actually, people have gone nation state oriented, their country first. So this makes it far more difficult for international organizations. They have an anticipatory function, which they're not doing well, but the implementation function is even harder. I ran a workshop recently for Interpol, and we had, I think, 60 leading commissioners, et cetera. And the thing that came out very clearly in terms of the narrative was Interpol is like a fishing net with holes everywhere. Because everyone is nation state oriented, they're not willing to share information, not willing to find the culprits around counterterrorism, around child safety, around cybercrime. So the new metaphor was a web with the poisonous spider at the center. So to create that, you need harmonization of individuals and harmonization of systems. So this is the scenario 3 I talked about, the Great Awakening. To prevent future pandemics, reduce human suffering, international organizations need real teeth, need real cooperation, and need narratives to make that happen. Now, going back to my second scenario in terms of, we're asleep for a year but get stronger, the contradictions are showing us, for example, that the old narratives don't work. Again, I've been running courses for police commissioners, police leaders for at least 10, 12 years. And the two narratives that always come around, and they help explain what's happening in the US right now, is the Blue Brotherhood. So if one police person does something wrong, you go to the story of Blue Brotherhood, you protect. The second narrative is the thin blue line. There's police here and citizens there, and never can they meet. So those narratives, I don't think have been useful for 10, 20 years, but clearly they don't work anywhere in the world right now. So this is where the citizens are saying, we want a role in this, and the police story doesn't work. So the old stories are being challenged at every level. Again, Jan's point, my point about schooling, the old schooling metaphor was the factory. The factory creates obedient workers who can produce enhanced productivity. That worked for 100, 200 years, it's useless now. We know that. Whether through AI technology, globalization, there's a whole range of things where the factory is no longer functional. So I know one workshop I did with the Ministry of Education in Norway, they said we have to become like the jazz band. So individual excellence and teaching students to cooperate. So this becomes the nation state problem, right? The Treaty of Westphalia, the nation state system we have now has been threatened over and over, and here's the latest threat. And again, the conclusion was it doesn't work. Many of the stakeholders aren't involved. We need to find a way to include them so we can have a more robust global system. So this is an early warning system, the pandemic of the climate change crisis to come. So if we don't solve this now, how will we solve the big ones? This is, again, you might say climate change light, and it's showing us what needs to be done. So of course we can anticipate hegemonic shift from US to China. We can also start to anticipate fractures within these large countries. So their choice will be to further fracture, whether it's in South Asia, East Asia, the Islamic world, or to decide, okay, the way to safety is to become grander. So a South Asian confederation, an East Asian confederation, an African confederation. So learning from Europe, but also seeing their mistakes, that's the way to create more robust resilient systems. So you want to localize in terms of supply chain, in terms of what we eat, how we farm, and you want to go higher up in terms of greater coordination. That requires systemic change and it requires individual change. So the hopeful scenario is this crisis gets us to change who we are and to change the systems that define what the world system looks like. So this goes back to Roy's narrative: is don't see COVID-19 as a war, because you're not going to win. Strength doesn't beat COVID-19, vulnerability does. That's why many leaders can't figure out what to do. They're used to being strong men. And public health responses are about enhancing the chains of vulnerability so the weakest don't spread the virus, so we all survive. So this is forcing a major global narrative shift. Us four may get it, people listening may get it, but we still have a situation where we do have dinosaurs running many countries. So is it the asteroid that eliminates them? Let's see. And those who have a more visionary, in this case, gender as a dimension, do they lead us onwards to a better future? These 4 or 5 contradictions are still being resolved, and we're in the middle of it. And again, it's a changing landscape. Our goal in the global policy field, global futures field, is analyze it, but also keep very clear where we want the world to go. So the visionary part, who do we want to be? Where do we wish to be in 2030 becomes crucial every day. So we decide based on where we wish to be, as opposed to past data or past traumas. They tell us what's gone wrong before, and we know what's gone wrong before. We know these crises lead to massive devastation and can destroy world economies, or they can reignite them and create something else. So these are the choices we're making every day now.
Thank you very much, Sohail. That was a very impressive, almost structural analysis or overview of the world systems, which is often forgotten from mainstream debate when we're speaking of strategic geopolitics. And I think another dimension that you pointed to, which is the vulnerability of some states, needs more discussion here, because while the pandemic has been bad for Western states and well-established welfare states as well, it has disproportionately affected less developing economies, low-income states, etc. So just if I can bring in Jan there as well, that what sort of actors, what sort of strategic movements do you think are needed to help these economies emerge on top? And can this be a moment where we can actually prioritize and for the first time probably look at the concerns that small island states, developing states, vulnerable states might have compared with the larger dominating economies of the world?
Yeah, interesting. I look at this as okay, beyond the suffering and beyond the deaths. This is I feel strongly that this is gives opportunities to countries and to people who never had the chance before. But at the same time, when you look at the United States economy now, and the news yesterday that suddenly out of the blue there were generated like a million new jobs. And the economy is bouncing back faster than anyone could expect it. In a situation where you both have the pandemic and you have protests and you have, you know, big problems. But United States is not the only market in the world. It is big, but no, it's not everything. I see chances for, island states, Asian, like Taiwan before the tiger in Asia. I see Thailand, where I stay right now. I see the both politicians and business people. They are talking about this as a clear global restart for business, and they see possibilities, and when they smell money, they go for it, and they have a stamina and a long-term business approach that will outlast any European idea. Where the Chinese think 1,000 years ahead, where Norwegians think a quarter year ahead, 3 months maximum. I see in Thailand they think years ahead, and they who remain cool, invest their money wisely, take care of the people, and get people to join and pull together. They will come out better than before, more wealthy than before, more happy than before. Yeah, I think this will lead to positive changes globally. And also, you mentioned about international organizations. Even though the new nationalism seems to countries are not building walls, but they will act, they will think globally and act locally. I think international organizations, they will get a new area. They will rise. They will play a new importance.
Thank you very much, Jan. And on that note, I think the important question to be asked along with what the future looks like is, how do you conceive this future, and what lens should forward-looking thinkers employ? What is the epistemology of the future that we're looking at? So if I can bring you in, Sohail, first to talk briefly about how does futurology really work, and what sort of lens should we have if we want to see the world as it ought to be?
Well, the first thing when you do Foresight studies, the last 6 months was project in Cambodia, Kazakhstan, Armenia, Philippines, Abu Dhabi, and now this week in Egypt. And we take them through a process, whether it's at the prime minister level or at a high school level. The first thing is very clear to see the future as an asset, just as you've spoken about it. Don't get in the prediction game because no one wins that game. It's an asset. How can you use the future wisely? Second, we ask, what's the use future? Use future is a practice that no longer works, but we continue even though it doesn't work. So that's where the contradictions come out, right? Whether it's gender inequity, global financial inequity, not understanding nature, our food preferences, they don't work, but we continue. That's to let go of the use future. The third insight from Foresight is what's called emerging issues analysis. What's coming down the road 5, 10, 15 years? How do I mitigate risk? And how do I use these insights? So the last 10 years, 15 years, I've been working with many countries saying, what are the implications for cellular agriculture, basically on your export? If most food will be done in one large building using cellular agriculture, what happens to your export industry? How do you take advantage of that? It's safer, it's cleaner, less antibiotics, it will be cheaper soon. So we ask, the world is changing in the next 10 years, what do you do there? And then people say, well, what should we do, right? So this is the appeal to expertise. And we know there's a movement globally against experts. So we say, well, don't pretend to know more than what we know. The one thing future studies teaches us is we don't know. So then we say, here's 4 or 5 possibilities. Let's play in these narratives, let's play in these futures, and start to decide where do you wish to play. Once we've done that, then it's getting very clear, what's your vision? We were part of Cambodia 2050. Here's where the country wishes to be in 20, 30 years. So once you start to set that up, then you develop strategies from there. And the last part is always the narrative. So the narrative defines strategy. It tells us if the story is working or not working. Again, with one country, when we talked about the factory model of schooling, they said, no, it's so embedded in everything we do, the exam, the test, right? The purpose of education is you go to school for this alleged job, which may not be there given the changes in the world economy. So there's only one narrative that works. I said, what's that? They said, you take a wrecking ball and you destroy the factory. Other people say, no, we need to create an ecological playground where we're learning from nature. Ecology is learning from each other, multiple systems. So it's figuring out that new global narrative. And then you're asking, finally, the last thing is, this is about ourselves, right? Futures can be the world systems in the next 20, 40 years, Our book, Asia 2038, tried to imagine Asia in 2038. And we came up with, here's what it could look like. But ultimately, that may empower people with a vision, but it's agency, right? It's you saying, well, what can I do within my sphere? In my day-to-day life, what's my ability? What's my zone of control? What can I do that can actually make a difference? So future starts from being something far away, sci-fi movies, to saying, here's the area that I can make a difference. To do that, what do I have to get rid of? What's coming down the road? What are the scenarios? What's my vision? Where do I wish to go? You put that together, you get a very powerful way of thinking about reality and a way of thinking about change. And it works. So we just did one empirical study, my colleague in Taiwan, students who have gone through futures literacy, they show a greater ability and openness towards the future. They also don't see problems within a simple way. So if you look in the future of suicide, most people say, well, that's just a social worker issue. Well, actually, it's not. It's a city design issue. It's a spiritual issue. It's an engineering issue. It's a law enforcement issue. So students think, aha, I need to know 6, 7 variables. I need to understand complexity. I need to understand how through complexity we can take new futures. So it actually works. We know from my colleague Renee Rohrbeck, corporations who use this approach, their market capitalization goes up 200% and profits go up at least 20 to 25%. Why? Because as Jan said, they're thinking of the long-term friendships, long-term possibilities, and they're staying focused. This is very different from what we often get in South Asia, the next electoral cycle. What can you do for me lately? So this is, in terms of going back to the US, the major shift that happened in the last 2 days. Many of us in the field were thinking, okay, so November elections, he won't leave, right, if he loses. And then he'll try to do a coup. And the chief of the generals just said yesterday, told everyone, no, it's not about the person, it's about the Constitution. So this is, again, they're saying, no, the Constitution embodies our vision of a good society. You protect that, we don't care who's in power. So this is a very powerful political move that was made yesterday, which tells us what's possible there. And in every country, we're seeing that. In the Islamic world as well, there's this, it's like a boat suddenly became unstable. Is it going to sink, or is it going to transform and become an airplane and fly off somewhere else? We're in that moment.
Thank you very much for that, Sohail. And if I can bring in Jan to comment on these interlinkages of structures in multiple systems that really work together, what is the lens that you look at the world with, or do you think forward-looking thinkers should view power balances and grand strategy as the world sphere with?
Thank you. But after talking after Sohail here is a bit of a challenge. What an eye-opener. I feel like a schoolboy sucking information from the professor. Thank you. Besides feeling humble, honored right now to be in this company, what the future will bring, I don't think we know anything yet, but we have to prepare. We have to prepare for the worst, and maybe first of all to be open-minded. And not walk in the, like Sohail said, not follow the traditions and just do things because we did it yesterday. And it worked 100 years ago. This is an excuse to think outside the box. And if many enough do that, I think many things will change to the better for most of the people on this planet. Because this is like it's like a golden opportunity. We get like a kick in the ass to get forward. And if we use this chance and look far ahead, I will not use the fisheye lens here. I would use the telescopic lens and look 10, 20 years ahead, maybe 50. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. And as you both mentioned, the pandemic at the same time, while it brings out challenges and, it compels us to reshape perspectives, I have to ask you here, because the world has faced grand transformations in the past. It has evolved, creating and transforming world orders with emerging challenges. But with the onset of this decade, with the kind of atrocities or devastations that we've witnessed within the first 6 months of 2020 itself, have we actually crossed the Rubicon? Have our challenges from the past, from inequitable development to nuclear arm races and deterrence, have they been so consequential for mankind have they had such cascading implications that there isn't really an option to look back, that we've reached at a point of no return?
Definitely, this is a point of no return, because whatever happened in the past, we cannot change. We can just say, okay, we managed through that. But this is the first time, as far as I know, or as far as I remember, that everyone on the planet is affected. Well, except the 7 scientists working on this island in the Arctic, where life goes on as normal. It was no COVID when they went there, but that is 7 people out of the rest of the world. Everyone is affected, and as I can see, that never happened before. Not during the world wars, not during the Black Death, which wiped out 70% of the population in Europe. So we have actually nothing to learn from the past. We are starting with a blank screen, a piece of white paper. We have to draw our own future now. And you can see, again, United States, Black Lives Matter, and this movements popping up, demonstrations all over the world, in Oslo, Australia, everywhere. People is engaged in their own situation. They want to take control, and they don't accept everything the leaders are telling. I will not use the word revolution. Oh, I use the word revolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Sohail, if I can get you to comment on that, particularly the aspect of our past and starting off on a clean slate from a point of no return.
No, I love Jan's metaphor there. You're drawing your future. I think it's very powerful. And I think that's the way to see this. In terms of, so in crisis response, right? Response 1 is you stay within your current way of knowing. Here's how I've known the world. I'll continue to know the world that way. What all of us are suggesting, there's something called metanoia, right? You have a mindful understanding. Here's how I see the world. Here's how you see the world. Here's the dramatic changes we need at the personal level. And of course, we were talking about systemic global changes. Now, there's a third possibility here. It's called paranoia. And we're seeing that dramatically, whether you want to say dictators showing up or movements deep into conspiracy showing up. So I think while the pandemic was very predictable, I have to say I've been very surprised watching on my knowledge feeds the number of people who've gone totally paranoid, believing that 5G causes COVID-19. So I think this is a point where leaders can use it as a way to create communities of exclusion, and then we see those contributions come back, or they can use it as a way to create communities of inclusion. Again, what we saw in New Zealand was actually quite dramatic. Every step of the way, she's been amazing. Or we can stay as we are now. Now, I think the point Jan was making is you actually can't stay as you are now. So this is the part we're trying to figure out. Are you able, in my scenario too, business, we rest for a year and then back as business as usual, or has that door been closed? If that door has been closed, then you need to go towards metanoia, mindfulness, a greater understanding of the way things are. But we shouldn't forget how paranoia will come in, and leaders who still say, no, I want to hold on to the past, let me hold on to that. They won't make this transition to a different world easy. So those are our risks there, right? What do we do with them? And we don't have a world system yet that can say no. They tend to be allowed to do what they want. And now in terms of this crisis, there's a weakening, I would say, of the world system in terms of agreement. So I sense the positive possibility, and I can see the risky dangers of the paranoid taking over.
Thank you very much, Sohail, and thank you very much both. And it indeed has not only been an insightful discussion on the multiple aspects to think about, but really about how can we think about them. But on that note, let me introduce the special feature, or the new element that we are trying out for this webinar today, that we've called a fast-paced Q&A. So I apologize at the outset because I will be placing you under time and choice constraints, but we hope to see how our thinkers and futurologists respond to some pressing questions that we've had. So the format is very simple. I will have one common question for both the panelists, and I just expect a brief response if possible, and less agitation if I put you in in a position of asking a very pressing question with limited words. So let's just get started with it. My first question, and if we can begin perhaps with Jan and then Sohail. My question is, the top 3 global threats you foresee emerging in the next decade?
Wow. Yeah. There might be a new pandemic, but this time I hope we are prepared. I hope that doctors in New York doesn't have to use the same face mask for a week. That is a threat, because when this blows over, there is a chance that people will forget and go back to normal, but I don't think so. Another threat is the situation between the large, I still call them the superpowers. Will there be a war? Yeah, there might be a war. I don't think so, but there might be a war. Another threat might be a migration issue because of food shortage, water shortage in parts of the world. So food industry, food production, water, clean water, not at least, in combination with global heating. That is another threat. Thank you.
Thank you. And Sohail, the same question for you. Top 3 threats that you foresee?
Clearly, climate change leading to the whole range of migration possibilities. 1. 2, fracturing within nations. The center cannot hold. They can't create a clear imagination of themselves in the future. And the nations fracture, which make things, well, it could lead to positive things, but generally it's a security threat. And 3rd, the rise of the paranoid. They've been the zombies, if you will.
Right. Thank you. So my next question, one classic political theory or philosophy that has aged well. Sohail, would you like to come in on that one first?
Classic that aged well. I'd have to go back to the classics in all civilizations, the core things, right? Be kind to people near you, love each other, be mindful, go within. Every tradition has said, if you want a better world, stay with those 4 or 5 core principles. That was really good few thousand years, and it's still good today. Doesn't matter who you are. All of us actually judge people on those 4 or 5 principles, how we treat each other, how we treat nature, how we treat the vulnerable, how we treat ourselves, how we treat others. Those have stayed, irrespective of any geopolitics, any threat. Those 5 work. And whatever you want for those 5, we tend to know what they are.
Right. And Jan, what are your thoughts on the same?
Oh, that was very interesting, but I will add 5 more. So I have 10 actually. And if people just follow the 10 commandments, it will be a better world.
Thank you for that. The next one, the 3 big miscalculations from the past that have shaped our world today. And these can be political events as well. So if Jan, would you like to take that one up first?
Could you pass that on to Sohail? I want to lean on his intelligence.
Would you
3 big miscalculations?
Yeah.
Okay, if you go back, I remember one of my colleagues, he was trying to get a book published on the internet in the early 1990s. and the publisher said, we won't publish your book. Internet is just going to last for a year. Let's start with that. Yeah, and you're next. We'll do
Yeah,
111.
Yeah, okay. I have same story from the business newspaper in Oslo, Dagens Næringsliv, where an article was published in the start of internet, where it was said clearly on the title that internet will be a flop. It will be a fiasco. There has been some other great miscalculations and mistakes, and but I don't. In this situation, I don't. To be honest, I don't like to look in the rear view mirror. Yes, we can learn from our mistakes, but I cannot pick out some single elements from the many mistakes that has been done on. I cannot do that, but thank you for asking. Or like politicians say, that was a good question.
I think the big one we've learned right now, pollution and economic development do not equate. Wherever you are, everyone says, oh my God, this is what fresh air feels like. This is what clean skies feel like. That actually economic development that's the biggest mistake, only measures GDP. That's the biggest mistake we've seen in the last 100 years. We're seeing very clearly, we need a quadruple bottom line. It's prosperity with people, with planet, with purpose. And the rationality, the empirical research confirms that over and over. We're not just measuring the throughput of goods and services, we're measuring well-being that's purposeful. That's one of the biggest mistakes in human history.
Right, so on to the next one, which everyone's asking, America or China. But that isn't my question. My question is whether this polar comparison will be the trend to look out for and the defining factor in the world to come, in your perceptions.
Start with me or with Jan? You decide.
Whoever first, actually. I think with the fast-paced thing, that's, this is where I get to pick, but perhaps Jan, if you could take that one up first.
So you ask actually who, America or China will come out as the winners here?
Whether that polar comparison will be the defining factor to decide what politics going forwards, whether it will continue to remain a comparative factor.
I think for sure both will be among the top 5, no matter what happened, because of their size and economy, and ability to. The Chinese ability for long-term planning and the American power, both military and the people of America, they're wonderful. They don't give up. So I think both of them.
Okay.
In the future, they will be more equal than today. But that was maybe not your question.
No, but that is it is a good perspective. So here,
that's a great response. No, I love it. So again, let's put our futures hat on. Scenario 1 is Jan's, which is fantastic. Both are there in 2050, equally running the planet. Scenario 2, by 2050, both fracture. We get an East Asian Confederation where the head of China is the Dalai Lama. You see huge pendulum swings. We've seen them all over history. Iran was extreme modernist, switched to the rule of Ayatollahs. China is extreme one party, extreme empiricist, extreme science and technology, pragmatic. It switches to a spiritual cultural civilization. So scenario 1, they both get along. Scenario 2, they both fracture and undergo transmutation. Scenario 3, by 2050, we have a real global governance structure. So the nation state you're part of is not defining. It could be your internet company. It could be it's where you identify with something else. So by 2050, the politics of identity captured as nation statism in 2020 become much weaker. So those are 3 possible. One is the obvious one, Hegel's Geist moves from the US to China, right? Second is Jan's, they're both there. Third is a fracturing and a dramatic pendulum shift, a reconfederation. And 4 is, of course, what I'm saying, we see real global governance, people re-identify not with the nation state, but with something else. At this stage, all 4 are possible. We know the classic geopolitical thinkers, they're going to say, what do you mean that's silly? Nation states now, nation states forever. We're operating in a different space saying, no, that's being challenged at every level. Please don't expect what happened in the past will continue. COVID-19 has shown that immediately that's a big mistake. So that will be the mistake in 2050. If we have this show again in 2050, what's the biggest mistake? To assume nation states will go on as they are for 1,000 years.
Yeah, no, and I hope we do. We'd love to have you back as well and speak of this. And we can be, with that time, we'll be able to say that we did foresee the future on that one. But
I'll send you my hologram. 2050.
We'll be there. So my next question, and this is one before the final, so the penultimate question, one world leader whose pandemic response you do approve of, and one whose reactions you definitely don't.
Jacinda Ardern, best ever. Donald Trump, worst ever.
And Jan.
Well, worst ever is the Swedish government. It's a country with 9-10 million people, and I think yesterday they passed 5,000 deaths. And the government is not in charge. They have one specialist attached to some bureaucratic office who has been in charge of this. And he is still saying that, oh, we don't know what we could have done, what else we could have done. But he could have walked from his office to the border of Norway and looked over the bridge to Norway, where we have 238 dead. And they were so old that they were on the halfway anyway. But Sweden, 5,000, it's a shame, it's a disgrace. And I would not be surprised if there will be court cases after this. Okay, good ones.
Okay, I'll put Sweden third. If I'm allowed third. 1, 2, 3.
Do that. I'm just happy. For once, I don't put United States anywhere.
That's fantastic. Well done.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
I agree with that. That's brilliant.
But the good guy here, it is many, Sohail, you presented many good examples, and I give my support to those, especially New Zealand, I would guess. Hong Kong, yes. They did well for a time. I'm not sure how they do today, but there are the countries I expected to do best did not. Thank you.
Thank you both for that. And the final question, I think this is particularly coming from the academic in me, that what's the one book that you would recommend everyone to read, especially for our given context?
Our own book or someone else's book, or what?
It could be, a personal endorsement as well. We will not disagree.
Should I take that one?
Of course, sure. Either of you for any recommendation.
After what I learned so far today, I would suggest that you read Sohail's book.
Brilliant. And Sohail, would you confer with that opinion, or any other?
Read Jan's book, but I guess I'll tell you the two books that I'm reading right now. Like when there's a crisis, I go back to a few books. They help me focus again. So clearly Wallerstein's Introduction to World Systems Theory. Yeah. It's really the 500-year stuff, that always helps me. Second, the person I did my PhD on, the South Asian philosopher P.R. Sarkar, he had a book on Proudest Economics, really saying this is the time for the cooperatives. This is a time for global equity. This is a time for gender equity. This is a time for global governance. And so again, both very different views, but Sarkar and Wallerstein, they help me think differently. So I'm rereading them again. I've read them 10 times, but I'm not that smart. I have to keep on reading books over and over.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you both very much. And we've received a number of audience questions here and otherwise, but let me compile a few of them and put them for you. So one of I think the big concerns is that on one hand, there's a rising wave of social movements, protests, and on the other hand, you see how governments are also closing in, taking lockdown as an advantage point. So where do you see the fate of social movements going forwards? Will this be an opportunity for nation states to actually close them down, or will protest movements only increase going forwards? And Sohail, if we can begin with you, and then Jan, if you also want to respond to that.
No, I think social movements get stronger, especially the ones that don't go into paranoia, that it's 5G or cannibals or stuff like that. Like Black Lives Matter is operating in the US, operating in Brisbane, operating around the world. So I think the crisis is global, responses are global and local at the same time. So I can't see them getting weaker. But this is helping social movements saying, here's who we don't want to be, here's who we do want to be. This is enhancing a progressive politics, even though we know extremists are everywhere.
Right. And Jan, would you like to comment on that as well?
Yeah, I see that the movement of the people are getting stronger and more solid and more globally. There are global, more or less organized organization who is taking power and responsibility. It's not only power to the people, it's people take power. And I think that is healthy, that is good.
Right. And we have another question, and this is directed to Jan there, on the role of the intelligence community, because so our audience member here argues, as do many others, that there's been a significant intelligence failure, which has resulted in why countries have become so overwhelmed in their pandemic handling. To what extent do you blame intelligence, the intelligence community, for their failures in dealing better with the pandemic?
Yeah, the intelligence service could have done more, but it is normally not the intelligence service jobs to keep an eye on every pharmaceutical laboratory in the world. But I think now, I almost said we, but they have to do it. They have to work harder and work broader, because it's not only, again, we have to shift from what we did the last 10 years, what we did during the Cold War. The intelligence has to work on a broader spectrum. And there is also some people talking about open source intelligent OSINT to work that way. Yeah, that was a good question. Intelligence should be better from the start. And because the reason for that is that you cannot trust the information that comes from any government when it comes to matters that are not gaining them in any way.
Thank you, Jan. And the next question, Jan, I think this one's directed probably for you as well. It pertains with one of the things you mentioned in the beginning as well, the growing threat of China. And one of our audience members has also reiterated this and said that this is a different China, it's a revanchist China, particularly with the Indian conflict. India has tried engaging China to avoid conflicts, but what is the best way to confront the Chinese Communist Party that is led under President Xi?
Well, first of all, when it comes to China, you have to take the gloves off and you have to be tough. And they are World Health Organization. They tried to treat China very kind during the start of this pandemic, and they tried to sweeten them to get more information out. That doesn't work on the Chinese government. So you have to be hard, firm. There are other border areas nearby around India where you have the same situation. And again, if you have a big, powerful neighbor, don't give him your little finger, because he take all of you. So you cannot solve Chinese aggression in a peaceful meeting. That is what I believe. Sometimes you should use the military.
Thank you very much for that, Jan. And so here we also have a question directed towards you, and that's again, going forwards, one of the most evident challenges is, or questions rather, is that if there is a vaccine, how will we look after its equitable and fair distribution? And it also comes from a greater concern about growing protectionist economies that we did discuss in the panel itself. But how do you think questions like equitable distribution, particularly of vaccine, be dealt with when there might be, with countries emerging differently from the experience of the pandemic?
I think we're seeing at the international health, public health level, basically it's moving to the right to a vaccine. I think that's the discourse, right? It can't be just for the wealthy. It has to be global, has to be shared. So that's kind of principle one. It has to be equally accessible all over the world. And it has to be people who can actually make it affordable. So that also becomes one of the main insights from this pandemic. It's a global public health. If you don't take care of the vulnerable, it's going to come back and bite you. There's no kind of safe space you can put yourself in a room. So the other good part of this is you have open source global science. The third eventual thing that we want, we don't have, can you imagine a world with pharmaceuticals or global cooperatives with different IP regimes? Now that's going out to Horizon 3. So one way to start to think about these, most people get stuck in Horizon 1. I'm looking at a problem, I'm using today's understanding, and I stay with that. So our goal is straight away, try to go to Horizon 3. How would you like it to be? Well, right to a vaccine, right to public health, right to complementary medicine, right to a global organization of medicine that are run by cooperatives. So that's Horizon 3. Horizon 2 is how do we get there? What do we have to let go of? What are our strategies and skill sets, workforce planning? What do we need to actually move towards there? So I always try to get people, when they ask these questions, you ask them within today's framework, then you get the answer, which is in today's framework. And then so what? You've just reinforced the present. To try to get this to reinforce the future you want. And that's, I think, what the question is saying. Equal access to global health.
Thank you very much, Sohail and Jan. Thank you both. And let me take this opportunity to bring in Arpit here for a few remarks on the panel or other questions. Arpit, please.
Sure. I mean, first of all, there are two things that I will take from this discussion, and two statements that I think that I'm gonna live with forever after this. One is coming from Sohail when he said that the future is an asset. And, we generally don't tend to think about future in those terms, because a lot of times we look at future with the lens of uncertainty, and which is always true, but then with a lot of fear as well. I mean, sometimes if you read authors like Yuval Noah Harari, you almost see the apocalyptic future just coming in. But it's refreshing to hear from Sohail that the future is an asset, and that's the lens that we should take to approach the future. So thank you for that. And on similar lines, what Jan said, that we are drawing our future on a clean slate. So not only that the future is an asset, but then we have some agency, we have some power to shape our futures ourselves, and that is also immensely useful, and that gives hope. So thank you, Jan, for that phrase. I think these are the two things that I'm gonna definitely live with from now. Now my question is, if I could just invite quick comments on those. One particular thing that Sohail mentioned about South Asian Confederate or the North African Confederate, and the world coming together in a supranational sort of a system. And I'm a big fan of Wallerstein as well, and that made me think that we are looking at, especially in the South Asian context, we are looking at SARC. We have seen other, countries trying to come together in a union, but then nothing has been so successful as the EU. And one aspect which I still feel is important is, unlike the EU, there is no security alliance between the SARC countries. So do you think that at the basis of all cooperation will have to be some fundamental security alliances and cooperation in terms of security first, so that we are at least sure that our neighbor is not gonna, we're gonna be living in harmony, and then we can start building off of that. So if Jan and Sohail both can comment on that, I'd really love that.
Maybe Sohail first.
But, with the South Asian Confederation, if you live in South Asia or travel to South Asia or from South Asia, it seems very distant, right?
Yeah.
Because the entire South Asian discourse is framed in geopolitics.
Yeah.
You can go to any village anywhere in South Asia. A 4-year-old will be the best professor of geopolitics on the planet.
Yeah.
They'll have read strategy. They'll know the China card, the Kashmir card, that card. Everyone knows it.
Yeah.
So there's a brilliance and genius to knowing how to play the chess set. And the chess set is a zero-sum game.
Mm-hmm.
So for both of us saying, well, what's the new game in which South Asia as a whole gains? Is it through military alliance? If so, great. Is it through financial alliance? I can see that. It's incentive for every leader to get wealthy. That makes sense. Is it through cultural alliance? Of course, anyone who's from a particular South Asia country, when they go overseas, they're South Asian now. Yeah. Everyone's brothers and sisters. So there's a lot of stories to build on. And if we can build on those, there's a little glimmer of hope. I'm not going to be too optimistic. It could be we join once we see the East Asia Confederation. I'm not saying union, confederation move in that direction, because they can see the economic incentives are stunning. There's no question there. So there's empirical evidence why this can work. And then the other parts flow in. And of course, the problem of large countries with weapons is real too. So this is kind of where we're seeing it go. I need the South Asian worldview to be post-geopolitical.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what I'm hoping for. It could be East Asia starts and we join in. That's as far as I've got with this. Jan?
Yeah, I see of course, all cooperation over the borders are positive. It's of the good. And you mentioned earlier that it would be interesting maybe with Dalai Lama as the leader of and Dharamsala as the capital. I follow your idea, and I could go for that, and then I would have an excuse to go back there. So yes, but they who think that the European Union is a fairy tale of happiness, it's not like that when you read the newspapers and everything, because England they skipped out. Yeah. And when the European Union suggested maybe you should stay 2 more years, I could hear the roar from the British villages saying, mm-hmm. No, we had it, without turning on my computer.
Remember, our minds are trained for trauma. It takes training to imagine the possible. Realism in geopolitics is always about structures that don't work. So we're trying to say, why can't realism be about structures and processes that are transformative? So this is training thousands of years, retraining the brain from thousands of years of how it's been to grasp novelty and transform. So that's part of the solution here too. And we're hoping this pandemic helps us move a little bit forward.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I think on this note, let me thank the panelists for their time, for their expertise in sharing that with us. And definitely, I think years down the line, if we're asking somebody what's the webinar that you recommend, listening to as a commentary on, the history of 2020 or so, I think this definitely will be one, because it has been cross-cutting, it has been interdisciplinary, and it really, points us in a good direction and tells us how to go about it, which is really really the missing debate. So thank you very much for shedding light on that and bringing your insight to us. And let me also bring back Arpit, who is the convener for this fantastic panel today, to just officially thank everyone. And thank you as well to our members of the audience who've, with their virtual presence, made this session so engaging. And we hope that we can host you soon, albeit with, socially distant spaces or seatings, but hope to see you soon in person as well. Arpit, please.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Neha. I think, you have done an amazing job just bringing the whole discussion at the fore. So thank you for that. And thank you, Jan and Sohail. It has been one of the most eye-opening sessions for me personally, and just such a pleasure learning from the both of you. And I think it's very important that we have dialogues like these. And most of the times when we are looking at this crisis, I see a lot of discussions just talking about, how is the next year going to be? How are we going to live this year? Or, what are our struggles from the past and what are our differences from the past? I think in this session, we really looked at the long term. We really deliberated on how humanity is going to progress together, not in 2021, but 2050. And rather than looking at, what the differences have been in the past, we've talked about, looking at the future from a clean slate. So I think just for those perspectives, thank you so much. And I hope that this would be a trigger for many such conversations in our audience and, in the larger civil society. And I hope that, some of the discussions that we've had, we'll be able to just log back in 2050, as Neha said, and we should be able to claim that, yes, we did deliberate and act on what we learned today. All thanks to you guys. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day, evening, wherever you are in the world.